Most of us spend our lives trying to fit in, at work, in friendships, even on stage. But the harder we try, the more invisible we can end up feeling. And I know that struggle firsthand. From comedy clubs through to corporate teams, I've often felt like the odd one out. And I've seen the same pattern in clients I've worked with as well, the ones who don't really blend in. And they are the ones who often have the most potential to stand out. In this episode, I'm going to show you how not fitting in can become your unfair advantage. You'll learn why standing apart creates influence, how to reframe rejection into credibility, and why the very thing that you might have been hiding could be your strongest tool and asset on stage and in business. We're going to unpack real stories, look at the psychology behind belonging, and we'll finish off with practical steps to turn your outsider energy into a magnetic presence. Welcome to Present Influence, the professional speaking show for speakers, coaches, and experts who want to deliver their message with more impact, influence, and inspiration. My name's John Ball, and I'm your guide on this journey to mastery-level communication skills. I'm willing to bet you've had at least one, probably more, experiences in your life of feeling like you didn't belong somewhere or haven't really fitted in. And for me, many of those, especially in childhood, I can think probably all the way back, some of my earliest memories were of times when I didn't really fit the mold and fit in with the other kids. I've always felt a little bit different. And those sorts of feelings can become particularly intense during our teenage years, undoubtedly, when the hormones are raging and what we want more than anything is for people to like us and for us to be popular. And if that's not really happening, it can be a very painful time, and often is for many teenagers. But it can show up many times in our adult life as well. Now, one example for me was through the latter part of my teen years, where I had this feeling of not belonging very intensely. I belonged to a church, I belonged to a church youth group, and I had the experience of what some people might call being excommunicated, or in the church that I was in, it was having my membership revoked. And maybe not for the reasons that you might expect. And things like my sexual preference had nothing to do with that decision whatsoever. It was actually caused by me questioning the literal truth of the Bible in a Bible study group when I was I think I must have been about 15, 16 years old. One of the church elders was leading the study, and he absolutely believed in the literal truth of the Bible. None of it was myth. It is all literally true. The Garden of Eden, Noah's flood, all of it. And so because I didn't, and because I questioned that, he pressured the church leadership to have me removed from the church membership. I was no longer an official member. And so I was no longer allowed to go to the church youth group. I was no longer allowed to really be a part of the church as such, although they said I could still attend church services, mostly because they still wanted me to go and play the organ because they didn't have enough church organists. So I think some slightly selfish motives there. I'd always been told not to question stuff, and that questioning was bad. And if you're asking questions, you're doubting your faith and all that. But inside, I always held this belief that if you couldn't question what you believed in, you didn't really truly believe it. And if your beliefs couldn't withstand some questioning and scrutiny, were they strong enough beliefs to really hold on to? And that thought never really escaped me. And I would say that whole time and that particular incident set me on the path of moving away from religion and more into philosophy. It's being a little different, asking some questions, not just going along with what I was being told to go along with, made me an outsider in an organization where I had been an insider. It pushed me out of the church youth group where all my friends were. It didn't cause any divisions in my family, I'm happy to say that, but it did cause some internal conflict as to, was this the right path? Am I moving away from my beliefs? How important are they to me? There was a lot going on. All of that on top of, teenage hormones and all the other nonsense that goes on for us when we're in our teen years. We have a lot to deal with as we're figuring out how to grow up and who we want to be and all those kinds of things. It was a painful experience. As I look back, hindsight being what it is, and it probably even not that long after I was able to look back and see this, that exclusion did set me on a path that I wanted to be on. That I started moving more towards thinking more for myself. I had a very strong desire to learn how to think for myself after many years of being told what to think. And I have no regrets about that whatsoever. But I do feel that if I hadn't been that little bit different, if I hadn't been apart from the crowd, I might not have. I might have just carried on believing, carried on tending, carried on being told what to believe, what to think, and not questioning it. And so I can't really see it as a bad thing. And eventually I did move away from being even a church organist, of just not wanting to go in there. So there was a big realization that happened for me in that time of recognizing that I wanted to be my own person. It was more important to me to be who I am than to be who other people wanted or needed me to be to fit into that environment. And I think many of us face those decisions on a regular basis. Do we show up in each situation as who we really are, or do we show up as who we think is acceptable or others want us to be, who we are supposed to be? I talked about professionalism in an episode a while back and how that can, for some people, end up being a prison for them, a costume that they put on, a way of showing up that limits them in many ways because they feel that they have to fit into this like archetype, this idea or concept of what a professional person is supposed to be like. And that means they end up squashing aspects of themselves or hiding thoughts away, biting their lips, keeping their mouth shut when they really want to say something for the sake of fitting in or not rocking the boat and all those sorts of things. And certainly in my life, being someone who has been in circumstances where my sexuality has been an issue, being in circumstances where my lack of religious belief has been an issue and caused some difference and conflict and othering, it can feel very awkward, and we do have to make those decisions. Do we feel safe? Do we feel safe to be honest about what we really want to say? Do we have what we call the psychological safety to be able to say that? Or do we have at least a big enough value about staying true to our core self that we're not prepared to lie or not prepared to fake? We are going to say what we really want to say, what we really need to say, even if there might be some negative consequences attached to that. We have to make these calls all the time. And I'd say probably one of the times that I was most recently confronted with this was a storytelling competition. And me being the natural people pleaser in me, which I'm always trying to work to suppress, wanted the story that would please everybody, be relatable for everybody. And I just had to accept that that wasn't going to happen. Even if I tried to do that, that probably still wouldn't be the end result. I was far better to go for an authentic story that was true to me, might not even feel relatable for everybody, but for those who would, it would be really relatable and could really, hopefully really feel the same kinds of feelings. So I wanted to tell a story about my coming out and about having faced people being against me for who I am, for my sexuality, someone even who was against me for my marriage and was trying to stop my parents attending my wedding. That whole story is online if you want to see it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can check it out. But the whole process of creating that story was confronting, because if I put this out, this is me putting out who I really am. And this is now even for future professional opportunities, there are people who may well see that who won't want to work with somebody like me just because of my sexuality. There will be people who don't approve, but there will also be people who either don't care or who do, maybe approve, maybe love and accept, or maybe just are welcoming enough and diverse enough in their thought and opinions to not be exclusive of people and not to exile or push people out, but to say, no, we welcome the diversity. We may not always understand it and we may not always be able to relate to it personally, but we still welcome it and we welcome you and we accept you. That's a very powerful thing when we find it. So very often being excluded from the environments in which we are restricted and we can't fully be ourselves is a real gift, because it pushes us, hopefully at least, it pushes us to go and find the places where we are, where we will be welcomed, where we'll even be celebrated. And if you are not in those environments where you are being welcomed and celebrated, where you have the psychological safety to say what's really in your heart and to be who you truly are, then you need to go and find those. Now, undoubtedly, there are people who have trauma and mental health issues and maybe even other psychological challenges that might need a bit more than that. And that's okay. That's stuff to deal with separately, but I'm talking a little more generally here. The times in life where we just feel there's an aspect of us that doesn't really fit in. We think a bit differently. I would expect that neurodiverse people particularly feel this, because often they'll think about things a little differently and not relate to things in exactly the same way. And whilst that can be undoubtedly challenging, there's always gifts that can come from these things, gifts that can come from seeing things in a different way. So not fitting in ends up ultimately being an advantage. Your crowd, the people who like you and love you or can at least relate to your situation and to your experience, are going to do that and they're going to support it. And those who don't won't, and they're not your people. And we ultimately just have to accept that. And we should have some discernment and discrimination about when and where we use our superpower, if you like, our unfair advantage. I would say for speakers particularly, if you are trying to be an image rather than be a real person, you're always going to be playing make-believe. And as somebody who lived enough years of my life in the closet trying to pretend to be someone who I wasn't, so because I was so afraid of people seeing who I really was, I can tell you that that is a very uncomfortable place to be. Whatever your closet is, whatever the mask is that you have over your face is going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be pain for that. And you are going to pay. You are going to pay, probably with pain, probably with sadness, probably with feeling unfulfilled or unable to fully realize yourself for who you are, to live your truth. These things are so important. We're often so afraid of being excluded or exiled because we're different. And I think the fear of exile is very deep-rooted within us because in humanity's past, exile meant almost certain death, being cast out of a community or society. You would no longer have access to your resources, to food, to people, family, status. Everything you had would be gone, and you'd be out in the wilds with the wild animals and the bandits and all the uncertainty that goes with that. Some people might just make it through, but many people probably wouldn't. And so the fear of being exiled is a very real one. And even today, it does happen in certain situations where people can still be exiled from their families, from their communities, from the people they've been a part of because they're different, because they choose to live their truth rather than to try and fit in or hide who they truly are for the sake of the group. And in those circumstances, it can lead to severe sadness, depression, and worse. Let's be honest, it can lead to far worse things. So I guess I am encouraging you with this video to be true to yourself, to live your truth and speak and live from your heart, and to not hide the things that make you different to other people. Certainly, okay, sometimes there are things in people's lives that make them too different to ever be acceptable, and you probably know what those things are. And if that's something you're dealing with, this is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about quirky personalities, maybe some eccentricisms, maybe being a very musical or arty person in a family of scientists makes you very different and hard to relate to. There are so many times, maybe not being of the same religion as other people, or maybe even being a religious person in a non-religious environment. There are ways that you could end up feeling othered or judged negatively because of things that you hold true. But staying true to who you are is going to be much better for you, because the friends you have, the people who love and care for you, will genuinely love and care for you for who you are. And the people that don't, even though that can be painful to be turned away by people who you want to love and care for you, ultimately we can find our family, we can find our tribe. We can find the people who we will fit with. We can find our audience. We can connect with them as well. So this is about vulnerability as much as anything else as well. This is about the ability to be vulnerable on stage. We don't have to show all aspects of our lives. We don't have to hang out all of our dirty laundry or tell people all our worst thoughts, fears, insights, actions, whatever. But we do have to be true to our own inner self, to our own values, if we're going to be relatable in any way. Otherwise, we end up just being an act. It's just a show. And if you just want to be a show person, and I say I've seen this in the personal development world, people who are just showmen or showwomen that don't have the depth. It's all superficial. They don't really have anything deeper to go into. And they're different people when you take them off the stage to who they are when they're on it. It's all a show. It's all fakery, smoke and mirrors. And if that's how you want to live your life and you can deal with that, then fine. Maybe you can take solace in that you're making money and people are being impressed by what you do. But at some point it will start to break down. At some point the toll of trying to be someone you're not is going to become too much for you. It's going to get in the way of a relationship. It's going to get in the way of relatability on more personal levels. It will interfere. Years ago, I read that book, As a Man Thinketh, and here's what I took away from that. I don't know how well it really holds up, but there are some things I still think of from that. And one of them is this: you know in your heart who you are. So if you do things that aren't true to you, you know that. Even if no one else does, even if no one else has cottoned on to the reality of what's going on inside you, inside your brain, you know. If you were sneaking funds out of a company bank account and embezzling and no one ever found out about it, you would still know, and you still know that that's who you are. And on some level, you're going to have to live with that. Or maybe you are unbothered about it, in which case, if you have no conscience whatsoever, this video isn't for you anyway. This really is for people who do have conscience, who do know that not being true to themselves can be a problem. If you hurt somebody and you never make it right, that's going to stay with you as well, even if other people never find out about it. If you pretend to be a success and people think you are, but you're not really, you're just faking it, buying followers, buying engagement online. You might end up having a top-rated YouTube channel or podcast, but you've bought all your followers. Other people may not know that. Some might, and some might even talk about it, but most people are never going to know about that. But you will. You'll know it's a fake. You'll know it's not true. The success isn't real. And you are the one who has to live with that. So this is the question to you. Are you willing to live with those things, or are you going to be true to yourself? And I hope it's the latter, that you choose to be true, even though it can be painful sometimes, even though it can cause some friction, some conflict, even in particular situations. It's important to be who you are, to go through the challenges and the conflicts. It took me years and years to navigate and get through to having a good relationship, a close relationship with my parents again after coming out. It was very hard because of their religious beliefs for them to deal with, but we got there. But it wasn't easy. And if I'd never chosen to be open about who I was, they would have just thought I was this guy who just seems to have a lot of male flatmates or something like that. They might have still tried to convince themselves that I was going to meet the right girl someday and settle down and give them grandchildren and all the stuff that they thought they wanted from me. And at some point, they were able to accept that that wasn't going to happen. And we ended up in a situation where I had to put things on the line and say to them, either you accept me as I am and treat me the right way, respect me for that as well, or we're going to have a very limited relationship, very limited contact in the future. Because that's how it has to be. I have to be who I am. And if you can't accept that, or can't deal with me being in a relationship with somebody, then we are going to have a lot of challenges in the future, and it's going to damage our relationship. They made the choice. I didn't know which they would choose. They made the choice to choose me. When somebody tried to stop them coming to my wedding, they made the choice to choose me. That whole story is going to be in the link for you as well to check that out. And I hope you will. It won me an award. It's up there behind me on the shelf. But realistically, fitting in feels safe. It does. It feels safe, and that's why we often don't want to come away from that. But it really silences the best of you, your best ideas, your creativity, the essence of you, I would really call that. It shuts down the essence of who you are, because you're trying to be somebody else and you're not going to be that person. Now, you can definitely work to be a better version of yourself, but it still needs to be true and feel true to you. So a better version of yourself isn't pretending that you're not something that you are, or not someone who you know you really are. And so it's vitally important that your differences, whatever they may be, maybe you like tattoos and you're covered in tattoos and there are people in your life who hate that. Maybe you smoke and you have loads of non-smoking friends and they hate, well, you could probably do something about that. Maybe you should. But maybe there are people who don't accept you for it. Maybe that you're outside of a group for that. Or maybe you stopped smoking and the people who you used to hang around with don't want you hanging around with them anymore because you're not in the in-group. It could be something as seemingly small as that makes you feel excluded and pushed out, but you're being true to yourself and true to who you are or who you want to be. These things are particularly important when it comes to being on stage, when it comes to things like storytelling, comedy, leadership, speaking. These things are really essential in the stories that we're going to end up telling. Because if they're stories about someone who doesn't really exist, that's going to be very hard to relate into. If the story is about a version of you that isn't real, that is faked, then who's going to really relate to that? People might think they do. Some people might buy in for it for a while. But what happens then if the cracks start to show? I should say if, I should say when. When the cracks start to show in the story and you find it hard to keep that up, or something gets out about who you really are, and it's different, very different to who people think you are. When we put anybody on a pedestal, when we put anyone into this idealized idea of who we think they are, we are not in a real relationship with them. And that's just as true for us as it is of anyone else. If we have idealized someone, if we think someone is the best, the guru, the infallible, they are only ever going to disappoint us, because nobody is, and nobody can live up to that, ourselves included. If we're trying to live up to impossible standards, we're always going to disappoint ourselves. The goal should be to accept yourself and others for how they are. You don't always have to like them. You don't always have to love and hang around with them, but accept them. Accept people for who they are and not need them to conform with who you think they should be or who you want them to be. There are societies in the world where conformity is treated as a very desirable quality, is sought out, is looked for, as even advertised on dating profiles. I'm a conformist. Is that who you want to be? You want to live in a conformist society where everyone's the same, where there's no real color, it's all just different shades of gray? Yeah, diversity really is a superpower. Being different, not fitting in, is valuable. It helps you to stand out, to be different, to be noticed, and to see things differently to other people. And so your uniqueness isn't a liability. It can be your leverage if you choose for it to be. And the sooner you stop sanding down the edges, smoothing things over for public consumption, the sooner people will be able to lean in and relate. So here's your challenge this week. Notice one place where perhaps you've been holding back to fit in, and flip it. Flip it. Share the different perspective. Wear the thing that feels too bold. Tell the story that you thought was too much. And then tell me how it went in the comments, or connect with me on LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week we're unlocking more tools to turn your quirks, flaws, and charisma into influence. See you next time.